just solved yaw. And next slide, please. It's what we call a sea anchor or a drogue. This is a modern sea anchor. It looks like a parachute. You throw this into the water, and what it does, it drags, just like my one experience with the parachute, and Bill has had many experiences with parachutes. When the parachute comes out, suddenly all your descent stops, and you have a very pleasant time floating down. You put this in the water from the bow of your ship, and it keeps the ship's being driven now by the waves and the wind, it keeps the ship pointed in the waves. Next slide, please. And here's what the guy said. Someone who had something called a yawl, a two-masted sailing boat. He deployed one of these drogues, you could call drogues. And he said, after deployment, my yawl lay bow to the wind and waves with very little yawing. Remember, yaw is your enemy. Yaw is your enemy in a storm. With 400 feet of rope, there was absolutely no shock loading. My boat rode like a duck, up and over each wave, always nose to the wind, which is what you want, meaning he had control of the yaw. Altogether, a very pleasant, safe, and secure feeling. A drogue, is how you control yaw. That's known to people who sail ships. Next slide. These are ancient drogues found in the Mediterranean. They, of course, didn't have parachutes back then. So what they did is they took a heavy rock. These things are about 3 feet tall, I reckon. I've got this picture of them. They have a paste to pass the rope through. They smooth the side around it so it won't chafe the rope. And they just, when they're in trouble, you only do this when you're in trouble. When you're in trouble and the wind is blowing real hard, you want to keep your boat pointed in the waves. You can't do it by your normal means of sail and so on. You use drogues. Next slide, please. And here's an example of how an ancient ship with somewhat drawn with a drogue on the front. My point is that the Ark must have used drogues, not that wooden sail you found at Ark Encounter. That does not work. Any nautical engineer would know that. But drogues do work. We had that good testimony, didn't we, about the modern drogue. This is, anybody know what this is? What's this over here?
Rock.
Would you go back one slide, please? No, back 2 slides now, please. Now, one slide. What's this?
Rock.
Can someone say drogue? Can someone please tell me this is a drogue? Go to our 2 slides. What's this? It's a drogue. Much more massive than this thing is about, this guy, let's say he's 6 feet tall, got another 2 feet here. This thing's partly underground. This thing's about 12 feet tall. It's a drogue heavier than any drogue you ever saw in your life. And where is it? It's in a place called, in the ancient times, Ararat. Does that mean anything to any people? This drogue, by the way, there are some people say 15 to 30 of these drogues found in this region of Ararat, which means modern Armenia. What's Ararat famous for in the Bible? A mountain? There's no mountain called Ararat in the Bible. Yes. Pardon? These are from the Ark, yes. These are more massive than any of those ones and there are over 15 of these things found here in the mountains of Ararat, or Ararat, mountains of Armenia. I cannot get this used in people's head. There's no Mount Ararat in the Bible. There are the mountains of Ararat. It's a mountain chain. Ararat actually is a region, which we all call Armenia. They have found 15 to 30 of these.
But that little boy in Sunday school
You sang.
said Mount Ararat.
It said that, didn't it? These are in, there's a some say as many as 30 of these. I calculated, this is made of basalt. And I calculated based on the density of basalt and the size, this is maybe 12 feet tall. The thickness is putting out maybe it looks like it's about 4 feet across. I think I calculated this thing would weigh 12 to 15 tons. This is one of them. This was the way that the Ark kept pointed into the waves.
There's no name on that.
The original ones, nobody wrote anything on them. Later, some people added crosses and stuff to them. There's some graffiti. One of them has a bullet point in it. You cannot use those things to date it. You can't date it back. Some of the writing, one of them has 8 crosses on it. But the cross, they recognized it was something sacred. So the Armenians, who were Christian, the first Christian nation in the world was the Armenian nation. The Armenians, they were all driven out of them, of course, in the Holocaust. The Armenian genocide in 1915. The Muslims killed almost hundreds of thousands of Armenians. But this is the area that was controlled by the Armenians, on what was anciently called Ararat. These are nobody's ever explained what these are. Someone told they're tombstones. Yes, some enterprising people haul them off to their grave. You can have a bigger tombstone than the guy next to you. You ever go through a cemetery, you'll see some people want the biggest of all tombstones. So, but the ones that are still under the ground, go next slide. Oh, by the way, this is not a picture of another one of them. And see that's Mount Agridag. Mount Agridag is called in modern times Mount Ararat, but the Turkish name is Agridag. Dag means mountain, I guess, in Turkish. There was no Mount Ararat in biblical times. There is now, just like it's no longer Gulf of Mexico, it's Gulf of America, isn't it? Well, this is called Mount Ararat. If there's one place you can be sure the ark will never be found, it's on that mountain. Because if it rested on the mountain is covered with glaciers. Glaciers moved on over time, over thousands of years, they wouldn't be there anymore. Furthermore, it's a volcano. It last exploded in 1850. Now, what do volcanoes do? But they spew out lava. So if the ark was on Mount Agridag, the lava would have covered it. If it was under the ice would have come down. There's one place you can be absolutely sure the ark will never be found, is Agridag. By the way, this drogue is about 15 miles away from Agridag. That's kind of interesting. It's still in Ararat. Next slide, please. Now, I want to mention the advantages of the drogue system. First, remember when modern sailor that I told that his 2-masted ship, it just kept it pointed right into the waves, just very nicely. It did what needed to be done for the ark, unless, like my pilot, the captain of my ship that was on in the North Atlantic, he had to keep it pointed into the ark. The drogues did exactly that. That's exactly the purpose of the drogues, and the drogues have been found. And I found this one reference that seems to refer to the cables, the ropes that held it. This is from the Altaic people of Central Asia. You know, those all over the world, people remember the flood. All over I was talking about the Mandan Indians that I was just talking to Brother Poff about. The Mandan Indians, the biggest ceremony of the year was remembering the Great Worldwide Flood. They spent about a week or so celebrating that. They did it a very poor way, but they remembered the Great Flood. All over the world, people remember the Great Flood. Well, how do you explain that, except there really was a Great Flood? But a lot of them get things right. Like, very many of them remember that there was a bird of some sort settled for 7 days and returned back. How do they get all those things right? Now, this one apparently remembers that there were drogue ropes on there. It hung from this ark, this great ship, Nama, pretty close to Noah, isn't it? Of course, over thousands of years, you get your words corrupted. 3 sons, got that right, didn't he? And so Ulgan, who apparently is the god there, built an ark, and it was hung cables from which to gauge water depth. That's not what the cables are for. The cables were to hold the drogues. So this is, I think, an inscriptional early reference that remembered what I'm talking about. The way the ark stayed pointed into the waves was it used drogues, and massive drogues, and those drogues have been found. Nobody has ever explained what these drogues that we have the pictures of, what they are, except, well, they're gravestone markers. Not all of them are found in the cemetery. And yes, Tim, but they use them. Why do they have the hole in the top?
You found the drogue, but you didn't find the ark.
We're not talking about that, sir. That'd be a different lecture. Okay, these are in the right region. Okay, next slide, please. What I'm going to say is the purposes of the ark's drogues, this is just absolutely brilliant as far as I'm concerned. It was control the threatening yaw that could throw the ark sideways to the waves. Control yaw, that's the purpose of a drogue. Another purpose is it reduces the pitch. What happens when you have a lot of pitch? What happens to a Norwegian ship? that I was on had a lot of pitch. It had no yaw, but had a lot of pitch. What happened to people? What? Yeah, one time I went to the rail, look over the rail of my wonderful seating. A guy about 20 yards away was leaning over the rail, and he said, "Get away." He didn't want the wind to blow the vomit. Get away, get away. Everybody's going to be sick on the ark unless you control the pitch. That's the other thing that the drogues do. The drogues have inertia. I mean, we're talking about tens of tons of weight. But you have to have ballast in the ship. So they also were provided the ballast. You put them on the front of the ship. One National Geographic specialist wrote them strung along the keel of the ship. That's not the way it works. You keep it in the front of the ship. And so they keep the ship from pitching. Remember, this is yaw, this is pitch, and this is roll where you get sunk. The fact that they're in the water means not only their weight, their mass, but also their friction in the water reduces the pitch and makes the ride smoother for the people in it. Now, I know not just people get sick from violent motion on the sea, animals get panicked, cows. I don't know what happened to dinosaurs on board but big animals get terrified by motion like that. You had to control the pitch. That was the other thing they did. You can go back to the previous slide, please. You got the previous. Well, we'll let him. So these controlled the yaw, therefore they prevented the roll, and they controlled the pitch. And the other thing is that I just want to mention is that when the ark started up, they had a very useful purpose, because once the ark got buoyant, there was a danger to run to anything nearby, trees, any high hill. You don't want the ark to run into those things. You're going to have a catastrophe. So they were used as regular anchors until the one with the longest rope on it finally broke loose. And now that had, I imagine it was 200 or 300 feet long. Now they're high enough that the ark, everything is covered, the ark can see. So they're a safety feature. Now, I'm not an engineer, but the other thing is there's no maintenance. No maintenance required. Once you put the drogues in place, the crew didn't have to do anything. The drogues took care of everything. They kept the ark pointing to the waves, they minimized the pitch, and they were used at first in order to prevent it from drifting and running into a nearby building or tree or something. And all you need to do to get rid of the drogue, very simple. You just take a saw and cut the causer. Mrs. Noah could have done that, couldn't she? Maybe she had a hatchet. You don't have to do anything. That is the sign of engineering genius. And I'm saying this is the way that Noah's Ark was navigated. So that was my presentation.
You didn't know that, did you, brother? You had no idea about the word drug, did you? That's a whole, yes, Sharon.
Okay. What? Then what, they cut them what? They cut them, the longest ones first. When the first one, the longest, then they cut them, and these have spread out. A lot of these are spread out in kind of a line. But a lot of them they took to the cemeteries too. So that's what happened to the drogues. Of course, the rope's gone, but there's no explanation of what those things are except drogues. But of course, they're at 5,300 feet above sea level. There's no ocean nearby. Nobody's ever explained what these are, except I can explain to you. They're drogues. They're made of basalt. If I knew a good geologist, I'd say, go find out where that basalt came from, because basalt in different parts of the world is different. Now, we can be pretty sure they weren't, I'm getting off the track, but that's what a geologist should do. Basalt is different in different parts of the world. You might be able to find out where Noah started from. It surely wasn't the same place he ended up. If you could check the basalt. Yes, sir. I would like to see a map. Somebody should go draw a map of that. Someone said they were in a curved line, except for the ones that are all put in the cemetery. Apparently, there are, they go from 5,300 feet up to higher, so that would be the 5,300 feet, which is the lowest, would be the first drogue that got cut, because that's the longest drogue. And then they, as one after the drag, they would be. So my point is, this is engineering excellence at the finest. No maintenance required. It has multiple purposes, and it's just the genius way of solving what would be otherwise a disaster, which I saw when I was on that ship. You cannot have your ship turned sideways. You cannot have it yaw, otherwise you are going to roll. Okay?
Now, I want to tell you something. How many Holiness conventions have you been to where you learn about drogues, Fantagusia, Alagusia? I mean, we are an intellectual repository that is far beyond the average Holiness convention, I promise you, right? Yeah? 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 Right. A great flood, that's true. You think the Grand Canyon was formed by the flood?
Yes.
You do? Well, that's two of us. All right. Three. Okay. I think it, what's that? Yeah. Okay. Okay. They also find sea shells and stuff at the top of some really huge mountains these days. And how'd that happen? Maybe there was a worldwide flood after all. In fact, we think there was. In fact, we're sure there was. The Bible says it. All right. These are great. Anybody else have a vocabulary word that we could add to our knowledge here today? The second word was Alagusia, A-L-I-A-G-E-U-S-I-A. Food that you used to find pleasant tasting starts to taste unpleasant. So Fantagusia is is a condition that causes you to think you taste something that's not there. You think there's something, you're tasting something that's not there. And that was delicious the way you presented that. Yeah, we got a vocabulary quiz for your Holiness Convention. So I suppose that Brother Gibson got confused, or maybe Pastor Rick did, so he was coming in maybe this evening because I'm supposed to. In fact, I was supposed to give him a motel room for last night. Well, I don't know where he's coming from. Yeah, I better find out where. Maybe he's still in the motel room. I better find him. Okay, well, wherever he is, whenever he gets here, we'll have a great presentation from Brother Gibson. Yeah. Don't say that. Okay. All right. Well, we're waiting now on Union Bible College that's going to show up. They're about 15 minutes away. And the Maleys are about 15 or 20 minutes away. And they're going to set up to sing for us at the 4 o'clock service. And we have normally at this time opportunity for people to go over to the house and get fruit or sodas or snacks or coffee or just kind of chillax for a while. And since everything has kind of got a little bit out of whack here, we'll just disband until 4 o'clock. And you can go over to the house and get something, or you can do whatever you want to do. And we're really thankful that you're here. Thank you very much. What's that?